on Zoom. Oh, okay. I just got, now we're recording. But Daniel said there was a handout that we were supposed to fill out. And we addressed the theme and the purpose of each book. And so for Genesis, the answers are, the theme is beginnings. The book of Genesis is a book of beginnings. You have creation, the fall, Adam and Eve, the beginning of Israel. And so the theme is beginnings, but the purpose is to provide a basis for the covenant that God makes with Abraham and his family. So Abraham, as I see it, is called to fix the problem with Adam. Like Adam introduces sin into the world. And so it's through Abraham and his family that God's going to fix the problem of sin. And then it asks for defining features. And these are just some of them that I identified. I like to pay attention to the blessings and the curses. So as the curse of sin spreads, God's blessing also spreads. And the first 11 chapters track the spread of the curse. The second half of the book, starting in chapter 12, marks the spread of the blessing. And then another feature in the book is the Toledeth formula, or these are the generations of. That formula is repeated about 10 or 11, 12 times in the book. And it marks out the major theme or major characters in the books, that these are the generations of the heavens and the earth. These are the generations of Noah, etc. But let's press on to Exodus, and feel free to stop me. I'm gonna try and take a little different tack tonight, where it's more lecture, and if you had questions or whatnot, we'll stop and kind of think through it. But Exodus picks up where Genesis left off. Joseph is in Egypt. The Israelites are away from the promised land. And there's a new Pharaoh who doesn't know Joseph. And he's worried about this growing number of Israelites. Does somebody want to read Exodus 1, verse 7 for us, if you have your Bibles?
But the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them.
Now, I think this echoes Genesis 1:28, the creation mandate. God told Adam to be fruitful and to multiply. So here, the Israelites are being fruitful and they're multiplying. That was also the covenant promise that God gave Abraham, that with Adam it was a command, but with Abraham it's now a promise. God is going to do for Abraham what he commanded Adam to do. He's going to make him fruitful and multiply. And so by the time of Exodus, it's clear that that's happening, only it's taking place in the context of suffering. The more the Egyptians oppress the Israelites, the more God blesses them. And so the covenant's taking off. The oppression looks like Pharaoh ordering the Israelites to throw their babies into the river. And one particular baby is Moses. And ironically, his mom, to save his life, she puts him in the river, but it's in a basket. So technically she's following the rules, but at the same time, she's kind of subverting them as well. And it just so happens that the baby is found by Pharaoh's daughter, and she names him Moses, raises him up as her own child. Evidently, Moses grows up and he realizes that the Hebrews are his people. And so one day he murders the Egyptian, and he's forced to run and hide in the wilderness. And it's during this time that God appears to Moses and calls him out to be his servant. And the encounter in chapter 3 is important because it's kind of a paradigm for all of the other call narratives in Scripture. You have Samuel and Jeremiah and Peter and Paul, and they read very similar. The use of the name twice, Moses, Moses, or Samuel, Samuel, the double vocative. But in chapter 4, let's actually first read let's read chapter 3 and verses 13 through 15, because this is God revealing his name to Moses.
You wanted 3:13 through 15?
Yes, sir. Thanks, Justin.
Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of our fathers has sent me, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is who you are to say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. And God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation.
Yeah, so that's kind of strange. Like, it's a cryptic name. I am that I am. What kind of hits you about that name? Anybody want to share?
It's all encompassing.
Kind of speaks to God's self-sufficiency, that everybody else, our existence is kind of derived from somebody else. Like, my parents met at some point and they chose to get married, and I'm a result of my parents' relationship, and my parents, they're a result of their parents' relationship. But God's existence is derived from his own person. Like, it's not contingent upon anything else. He exists just because he exists, and that's who he is. So he's the creator. It's strange because later in chapter 6, he says that he didn't reveal himself by the name Yahweh to the patriarchs, but he revealed himself by El Shaddai. So I think that means that the patriarchs might have heard the name Yahweh before, but they didn't realize the full extent of what its meaning was until the Exodus. Like, the Exodus was going to show how God's self-sufficiency was going to manifest itself in salvation for Israel. But in chapter 4, Moses heads to Egypt, and there's a strange story. Let's just look at chapter 4. God says, he tells Moses to go back, and verse 21, it says, the Lord said to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let his people go. Then say to Pharaoh, this is what the Lord says, Israel is my firstborn son, and I told you, let my son go so that he may worship me. But if you refuse to go, then I will kill your firstborn son. So here we get the first hint that Pharaoh's going to be somewhat stubborn. He's not going to want to participate with God's plan of rescuing Israel. He's going to be the antagonist to this drama. And then the next event is kind of strange, because on the way, God tries to kill Moses, and that's just a strange bit. But Zebra takes out a flint knife and she circumcises her son and touches Moses's feet with it. Yeah, that's a strange story, and if you read different commentators, they'll come up with different answers. I think from what I gather that the Midianites practiced circumcision, but the Egyptians didn't. And so Zipporah is actually not upset at Moses, but she said the bridegroom of blood means, like, kind of we belong to the same family now. We're a part of the same people. Up to this point, Moses had been hesitant about circumcising their son, but now after God was about to kill him. That's a funny way of saying that God's showing him grace, because you think about it, if God wanted to kill somebody, he probably could do it. All right, so then you have the plagues that take place kind of starting around chapter 7. God gave them different signs. And one of the things I liked about Walton is he kind of tied in the plagues to the different Egyptian gods. And in this section, Yahweh is demonstrating his superiority to the gods of Egypt. The gods of Egypt are just fake. And so everything that God attacks is something that the Egyptians worshiped, whether it's the sun or the Nile or the livestock or even Pharaoh and his family. And each time God sends a plague, Pharaoh pretends like he's going to let the Egyptians go. But then when God relents from the plague and it stops, Pharaoh changes his mind. And according to the book, that serves this purpose, that God is hardening Pharaoh's heart. And I'm sure based on people's theology, you got the whole Calvinist and Arminian question. And some people say that Pharaoh hardens his heart first, and then God hardens it in response. And others say that God intends to harden Pharaoh's heart, and then that's what happens when Pharaoh hardens his. I think it's kind of a giant debate over the chicken and the egg, and you got this question of God's sovereignty, and I think how you answer that question is going to be based on different things in Romans. But I think it's important to remember that Pharaoh is far from a blank slate. Human beings are born sinners, and so God's not pressuring Pharaoh to do something that he's not already inclined to do. Pharaoh, if left to his own, he would sin. And so by hardening his heart, God's just kind of removing any common grace that would keep him from going his own way. It's kind of like in Romans 1, when God hardens people's hearts there, he's letting people do what they want to do. He's letting our natural inclinations kind of take their way. God gave them over to their desires. I don't know. That's an issue that people are going to have to think through. Any thoughts on that, or like how you kind of approach that?
I guess I always have, just like what you're saying, that it was free will, and I think it's a good way to demonstrate that free will, even at that level. I guess that's kind of where I've always thought of it, just like kind of like you explained there.
One of the ways I like to think about it is, what would have happened if Moses goes to Pharaoh and he just lets him go? Like he says, "Oh yeah, that's a good idea. I'll let you guys go." Who gets the credit for it, right? It would have been, they would have walked away going, "Well, Pharaoh's a pretty good master. He was a nice guy, and the gods of the Egyptians are really kind, generous gods." And so one of the reasons God hardens Pharaoh's heart is it gives all the glory and credit to Yahweh. Only Yahweh has the power and the goodness to rescue his people. Look at chapter 9, and somebody want to read? This is during the plague of hail, and this is the passage that Paul quotes in Romans 9. Does somebody want to read chapter 9? And let's read verses 13 through 16.
I'll read it. The Lord said to Moses, "Get up early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh and say to him, 'Thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, release my people so that they may serve me.' For this time I will send all my plagues on your very self, and on your servants, and on your people, so that you may know there is no one like me in all the earth. For by now I could have extended my hand and struck you and your people with plague, and you would have been destroyed from the earth. But for this purpose I have caused you to stand, to show you my strength, and that my name may be declared in all the earth.
What translation is that, Scott?
That's the New English translation.
That's the New English translation. I like that. For this purpose, I have caused you to stand, or yeah, I've raised you up for this purpose. So the Exodus has a missional purpose. Like by bringing judgment on the Egyptians, God wants the whole world to know who He is. He says so that my name would be proclaimed in all the earth. Somebody brought up, why did God choose Abraham? And it's so that he'll be a blessing to the world. So this concept of election always has the world in mind. God chooses Israel to be a blessing to the world. They're like the postal worker. It was their job to deliver God's blessing to all the different mailboxes around the world. Of course, sin kind of gets in the way of that, and Israel doesn't carry out their vocation, and so Jesus comes as the new Israel to do what Israel can't do for themselves. Okay, so some people question the justice of the last plague, and that makes sense because like it doesn't seem very fair that God would just strike down all the firstborn children in Egypt. But I think this fits the lex talionis laws of the Old Testament. So you have an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, which wasn't ever really taken literally as much as this was a figurative way of saying that the punishment fits the crime. It's not more, it's not less. If I take out your eye, you can't take off my head. If I knock out your tooth, you can't, just kill my whole family. So justice has to be proportionate for the crime. And you think about it, what did Pharaoh do at the beginning of the book? He attacked the children of Israel. He attacked their babies. He was throwing them in the Nile. So the last plague is God bringing Pharaoh's actions back upon himself. So it logically fits the oppression that Pharaoh was bringing against Israel. And the last plague also sets the stage for the Passover. And that's kind of, Passover is to the Israelites what 4th of July is for Americans. Like this is the holiday that Israel celebrates their freedom. And if you look in the New Testament, it's always when Jesus is traveling to Jerusalem for Passover that people all get excited because during a time of oppression, they're wanting to, think of what the 4th of July might look like in our context. If another country came and took us over during the 4th of July, we would kind of be like, this is the time to get ready for freedom. And so they're all sharpening their swords and getting ready to, overthrow Romans. But here in Exodus, this sets the stage for their freedom from Pharaoh. So God's going to send the destroying angel to bring death and destruction, but he warns the Israelites first that to put blood from the lamb over the doorway of their house. And I think blood here signals the death of a substitute. So the lamb's going to serve as, it's the death of the lamb that's going to take the place of the Israelite firstborn. So instead of bringing judgment on Israel, it's going to fall on the lamb instead. And then so they're also encouraged to eat this meal. They're going to eat the lamb, and they need to do it in a hurry because they're going to leave Egypt as soon as the meal's over. So they leave, and then right away Pharaoh changes his mind again. He chases them to the Red Sea, and God is victorious. And he let's jump over to chapter 15, and somebody want to read 15, 1 through 6?
I can read it. I will sing to the then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will praise him. My father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has hurled into the sea. The best of Pharaoh's officers are drowned in the Red Sea. The deep waters have covered them. They sank to the depths like a stone. Your right hand, Lord, was majestic in power. Your right hand, Lord, shattered the enemy.
And then down in verses 17 and 18, he says, he's talking about Israel. He says, God, you will bring them in and plant them on the mountain of your inheritance. The place, O Lord, you have made your dwelling, your sanctuary, O Lord, your hands have established. The Lord reigns forever and ever. So God rescues Israel, and it's not complete until they're in the promised land and there's a sanctuary, a place where God is living with his people. And that's really the mark of his kingdom, is God's sanctuary, his house with his people. And that's really the second half of the book is this tent where God is going to live with his people. So in chapters 16 through 19, leading up to the Ten Commandments, the Israelites they're traveling through the wilderness, and they have some good times, some bad times. They're complaining about the gifts that God has given them. And then in chapter 19, they come to the mountain, and God makes a really cool statement to them. This is 19 verse 4 through 6. Does somebody want to read chapter 19, 4 through 6?
I can read it. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites.
I'm a guitar player, and so one of my favorite possessions is this. I have a Taylor 810 guitar, and my kids know that they cannot mess with this guitar, because if they mess with my guitar, and I had a different guitar that my son Aaron one time I was gone for the day, and my son Aaron, he was only like 2 at the time, but he was messing with this electric guitar, and he dings it. And I was so mad. I kind of stormed out of the house, and I was like, I muttered under my breath, I hate life. I was just kind of upset about this guitar getting injured. And my neighbor right across the way was like there, and he saw me, and Kurt, his name was Kurt, and he just kind of waves at me, and I felt embarrassed. But we all have a treasured something that's super valuable to us. And for God, that's his covenant people. This is we're God's treasured possession, and we'll be a kingdom of priests. A king represents God's authority to the people, and a priest represents people to God. So this is really God's. This is our vocation, our identity as God's people. It's also in First Peter how we're described as, it's both Jews and Gentiles. Like the church carries this vocation on in some regard. And somebody want to turn over to First Peter chapter 2, 1 Peter chapter 2, and read I think it's verse 9, verse 9 and 10.
I'll read it. This is actually what we did this on Sunday, so it's familiar to me.
Oh,
But
yeah,
you-
cool.
But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy.
Yeah, so that ties back to Exodus 19, and so we kind of carry this on to some regard. Does the language of being carried on eagle's wings remind you of anything else?
In Isaiah,
Yeah, I think Isaiah, that's a part of his second Exodus theme. We all know that verse that we'll mount up on wings as eagles and we'll walk but not faint. But that's really tied to the prophet Isaiah saying that God's people, they're in exile, but God's going to bring them back at some point in the future, and there's going to be a second Exodus of sorts where they'll go on this eagle's wing experience as God rescues them. So they're at the foot of Mount Sinai, and here's where you have the 10 Commandments in chapter 20. And I think this is covenant law. And so it's for God's people, it's for his children. And he starts by saying the preamble is, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. So the law begins with salvation, right? So God says, I saved you, I rescued you. Now this is how I expect you to live as my people. Too often we get it the other way around, and I think that's legalism, is when we say, here's law. If you keep the law, then you can have salvation. You can be in a relationship with God. But God actually does it the other way around. He says, I rescued you, I saved you, I brought you out of this house of bondage. And so now I want you to live as my covenant people. And these are the rules that my covenant people will have. I don't tell the neighbor kids how they live, and I'm not sure if they would listen to me if I tell them rules, but I do expect my kids to follow our rules as parents because they're my kids. And so all right, and then there's 2 tablets, and I think this is cool. One of my teachers at Wheaton, Dr. Block, he argued that the reason that there are 2 tablets, traditionally it's understood that like the first 5 commandments were on one tablet, and then the second 5 are on the other tablet. But Block thought that it's more like it's a covenant, and so one copy is for each party. When you rent a house, there's 2 copies of the lease. One's for the landlord, and the other's for the tenant. And so one covenant, one copy of the law is Yahweh's copy, and the other is Israel's copy, and they both get put in the Ark of the Covenant. And so that's kind of a reminder of this relationship. God gives them his covenant law. All right. So then chapter 21 through 24 is called the Book of the Covenant. And here you have a lot of the civil laws with Israel. I think it's interesting that the first set of those laws is the ransom slave. Like, so if you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years, but in the 7th year he shall go free. And then this slave, if he chooses to love his master and he doesn't want to leave his master, he can get his ear pierced, or they take an awl and kind of knock a hole in his ear. I probably more nicer than how I just put it, but that's Israel. So I think kind of this law sets the paradigm for the rest of them, because they're the bondservant that serves Yahweh just because they've been rescued and they love Yahweh. So that's kind of a paradigm of who Israel is. What does anybody there's kind of two different ways that people take the law generally. And this is kind of a debate that goes back to Luther and Calvin. Luther kind of saw the law as being primarily designed to bring a curse upon Israel, that the law revealed the problem of sin, and we can't keep the law. And so since we can't keep the law, Jesus deals with the problem of the curse of the law, and we're not under the law, we're under grace. And so in more of a Lutheran take, the law primarily brings condemnation, and it doesn't really apply to us as believers. The other end of the spectrum, you have John Calvin, who kind of treated the law as it's called like the third use of the law, where he thought it had more of an abiding message to us, that if we interpret it in light of Christ, the law will continue to apply to us in different ways. I don't know if Calvin wrote about it, but sometimes you'll have people in that tradition argue that there's the moral law that applies to us, the ritual law doesn't apply to us, and then the civil law may or may not, depending on who you talk to. That's one of the issues you kind of got to think through as you're studying through this part of Exodus. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Like where they lean on whether these laws still continue to apply to us in any way?
Hey, Daniel, I just got a question about the tablets. When you talked about the tablets and two laws or two copies of it,
Yeah.
in my mind, I always see the picture of, half of the, the first 5 of the commandments on one side and the other half on the other side, and it's 2 tablets. Can you explain a little bit more what you were talking about as far as 2 sets of 2 copies?
Yeah, so covenants, that, how like in a contract's different than a covenant, but in a contract you have one for each member of the deal, right? So here's my paperwork and here's the bank's paperwork. I think that's kind of what's implied by the 2 tablets, is that one's God's copy of the agreement, and the others Israel's copy, but they're both kept in the Ark of the Covenant. It's not really ever explained in much detail. That's kind of something that I think scholars, I've just always assumed that there were 2 tablets because 5 of them fit on one of them and 5 of them fit on the other. But I think if you're curious about that, Daniel Block would be maybe one of the guys to look at to see more about that.
Okay. Yeah, I just hadn't thought of it ever before. So
no, when I heard him say that, it just like a light bulb went on, because I think I was the time I was taking his class, I was signing a lot of paperwork for housing and different things like that, and I was like, oh yeah, this makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so in chapter 25 you have the Ark of the Covenant, and this goes from 25 to really to 31. So in that section, you first have God gives them the plans for the ark. And then in chapter 35 to the end of Exodus, they carry out the plans. So it's like, it's kind of interrupted by the story right in between. And that's the golden calf. So in between the plan and the execution of the plan, you have Moses on Mount Sinai, and the Israelites decide to make this idol, which kind of represents a rival liturgy to the one God is giving them. So God has given them all this covenant law to shape who they are and to give them practices and customs that will form their identity. But right in the middle of all that, they decide, hey, we don't need to follow that. We're just going to make our own idol. And Aaron says, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. So it's almost like they're going to shape how they worship instead of listening to the way of worship that God gives them. And it kind of fits this theme of covenant jeopardy. In the Bible, whenever God makes a covenant with somebody, the very next move is them doing something stupid. God makes a covenant with David that he's going to make his family an internal group of kings and stuff like that. What's the next move David does? It's Bathsheba. The same thing with Aaron in Leviticus. God makes a covenant that he's going to make Aaron's family the priesthood. The next move is his sons offer strange fire or foreign fire. And it's almost like raises this question: how can God keep the covenant with such stupid people that are who are in rebellion against him? And so if the covenant's going to get carried out, it's going to be entirely based on God's grace. In chapter 33 and 34, God is angry because Israel has disobeyed him, but Moses then starts to intercede for the people. And this conversation's similar to what happens with Abraham and God in Genesis 18, and it's similar to the conversation with God and Samuel later in the Bible. But like both these interceding moments represent this inner tension that resides in the heart of God. Like there's God's justice and there's God's mercy. And God says, well, I'm a holy, righteous God, and I can't let this kind of thing happen. And then Moses kind of speaks for God's mercy, and he says, yeah, but your name's at stake, your reputation's at stake, and so you need to forgive. And the ultimate solution of this tension, of course, is Jesus. And in Romans 3, it talks about how God is the just and the justifier. He's holy and righteous, but he's also a gracious, kind, forgiving God. And it's the cross where we can see how that happens. But then in 34, you have God reveals his name to Moses. And this is one of the best passages in scripture. If I had to pick a favorite passage in Exodus, it might be this. Does somebody want to read verses 34, verses 4 through 7?
I can. This is Jesse. So Moses cut 2 tablets of stone like the first ones. Early in the morning, he climbed up Mount Sinai as the Lord had told him, carrying the 2 stone tablets in his hands. Then the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and called out his own name, the Lord, as Moses stood there in his presence. He passed in front of Moses and said, I am the Lord. I am the Lord, the merciful and gracious God. I am slow to anger and rich in unfailing love and faithfulness. I show this unfailing love to many thousands by forgiving every kind of sin and rebellion. Even so, I do not leave sin unpunished, but I punish the children for the sins of their parents to the third and the fourth generations.
So
Did you say verse
yeah,
8?
yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Yahweh is slow to anger. The Hebrew expression there is that he's long of nose. It's kind of a strange, if you think of like an animal when it's mad, you can kind of see the anger in its nose. And so having a long nose is like the opposite of having a short fuse. It means that you're gracious. You don't just fly off the handle. God just, contrary, a lot of people have this picture of God in the Old Testament that he's just like this, he's got this violent temper and he's just, always throwing off the ham or flying off the handle, and everybody's on eggshells trying to appease God. But here he tells Moses that he's slow to anger. That's not who he is. He's abounding in love and faithfulness, or in Hebrew, it's hesed and emet. Those are the two words that get translated in Greek as grace and truth. So in John chapter 1, when it says that the word became flesh and dwelled among us, and we saw his glory, full of grace and truth, it's those two words. And John really in particular kind of is appealing to that story because he says nobody has seen God at any time. And that kind of, you're thinking like, wait a second, what about like Moses at the burning bush? Like here, God passes by Moses and that gives him a glimpse of who he is. So John's intentionally appealing to the story, but he's saying that what Moses saw of God is nothing compared to the revelation we have of Jesus. Jesus gives us such a more magnificent picture of who God is because he's God in the flesh, full of grace and truth. All right, and then in 35 to the end, you have the tabernacle, and I think the cool thing about this is that the tabernacle is God's, it's like a traveling tent where this is a sign of God's presence. And so salvation's not complete until God is residing with his people, that he's living with them. And at the end of Exodus in 39 and 40, there's all these little echoes of Genesis 1 with creation. So if you turn to like verse 39 or chapter 39 and verse 40, it says, all the work of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, was complete. The Israelites did everything just as the Lord commanded Moses. And then 39 verse 42 says the Israelites had done all the work just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Moses inspected the work and saw that they had done it just as the Lord had commanded them. So Moses blessed them. So in creation, on the sixth day, after God's got everything made and put together, he stops and he looks back at it and goes, well, that's good. That's just the way I wanted it to be. And he puts his blessing on it. And then you have the seventh day where God rests and he moves into creation and it becomes his temple, so to speak. Well, here you got the tabernacle, which is almost like a mini replica of creation. It's got three parts. There's the heaven of heavens, there's heaven, and then there's the outer court, which represents earth. And so God is now dwelling with his people in this little microcosm of what creation is to be. And then the book ends with the God's glory cloud, the sign of his presence. It fills the tabernacle. This is chapter 40, verse 34, that the cloud entered the tent of meeting and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it. The glory cloud, or the glory of the Lord, filled the tabernacle. So that kind of sets the stage for Leviticus. Like God is now dwelling in the the camp with the Israelites. But before Moses goes in and joins them, they need to understand what holiness is and be ready for that. All right, so now I'm supposed to look up what the theme and purpose was. We were gonna write this down. Because Daniel was talking about a test. Nobody actually wants to take a test. Do you guys want to take a test?
I don't think anyone's going to argue not taking a test, but I think some
Not
might need
taking-
their credit.
There's
I
some
love
people,
taking.
they just like tests.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a chance to like show that you actually learned something. And don't you feel as a teacher, it's nice to have a test because then you know people are paying attention?
Hey, where is John? I can't find his note of what. So what would you got? How would you fill those out yourself without looking at Daniel's note? What's the theme and purpose of Exodus?
I think the theme is within the name. Partially, it's Exodus means the going out or the departure of Israel from Egypt. So kind of the redemption of Israel's people. Did I do all right on that test, Talitha?
Yeah, that's a good. I'm not sure if it's Daniel's answer, but it's a good answer. Anyone else?
What's the theme and purpose of Exodus?
Oh, here, wait, let's see. Oh, I got the blank one now. I got the blank one, but not the real one.
Now you're being tested too.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the chapter, there is, I mean, they have major themes and purpose and, but it's a lot of, like yours was different in Genesis from what the book said.
Oh,
So-
really?
Yeah, I'm on an online book, but it's the very first where it says chapter 5 Exodus. It has key ideas, timeline, purpose statement, major themes, and God's presence.
I think that if it doesn't say what Walton Hill had, it's not right.
I've been memorizing this all week.
Anything else stand out to you? I did most of the talking tonight.
For some reason it didn't I guess it didn't hit me until as we were reading through, not tonight, but like this week as I was reading through it about the blood of the lamb on the doorways. Like I guess my brain always just processed that as that was just the sign for God to pass over. And then like this week it just hit me for some reason like, oh, that's the lamb. He's the sacrifice. And it's his blood that cleanses us. And I was just like, I don't know why I never picked up on that before, but it just kind of hit me this week. So that was kind of a cool part for me anyway.
Thanks, Kevin. Kevin has to say something because he's got to see me outside of Zoom. Scott, what stood out to you? I'm kind of curious as you're reading through it.
Well, you talk about theme and purpose, God saving his people, Israel, and establishing his covenant with them. So yeah, I like the way that you were connecting at the end there, what's Exodus 34, we're talking about grace and truth there, that and connecting that to John chapter 1. Yeah. I don't usually make that connection, but I can see it there and appreciate you bringing it out. Yeah. Mhm.
I think it's also like the tabernacle takes a lot of time to cover, and like if I were teaching it, I probably wouldn't spend that much time talking about the tabernacle, because it's like, it's one of those passages to modern readers, it's like reading through a Cabela's catalog. It just doesn't seem that exciting. But when you see how much time in the book is devoted to it, it shows that God's presence was super important to him. Like, salvation's not complete until God's living with them, and they have this beautiful tent that signifies it's a royal mansion,
Yeah. Well, and Jesus came, right, in the flesh, to tabernacle amongst us. I think I don't know if it's the Message or whatever it was. Some other translation said, and God moved into the neighborhood,
That's good. Yeah.
Mhm.
One more New Testament parallel. Luke 9, I think. So on the Mount of Transfiguration, in Luke's gospel, it says that Moses and Elijah appeared in glorious splendor talking to Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring fulfillment in Jerusalem. So the Greek word for departure there is Exodus. It's the Greek word Exodus. So they were talking to Jesus about the Exodus that he was about to bring to pass in Jerusalem. So this whole drama in Exodus really gets finds its fulfillment ultimately in Jesus, and when he fights a different Pharaoh.
Did you freeze up, Daniel?
Yeah, it looked like he froze up.
Mhm. That's the last word, I guess, huh?
He lasted the whole meeting. That was great. That's too funny. And next week in Leviticus. No.
Can you tell me what was the reference of the verse he just read about?
I just heard Luke 9, and then I was trying to find it.
It was Luke 9:31.
31, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Teacher's gone. We're still recording. We got to be on our best behavior. Real quick, Logan, what are you said you're on a hunting trip?
Yeah, I am. I'm in Wisconsin hunting deer.
Deer? That's really funny because while we were in the middle of Bible study,
Hey, sorry, it
this
timed out. What's
I
that
don't know
mean?
if this is what walked by me on it, just like literally within 15 feet.
Wow.
Holy man, I wish I saw one like that tonight.
I was literally sitting here and it was like, and then it stopped and looked at me and I'm like, wait a minute. So, all right, you're back. I filled in the time for you.
Oh, okay. Hey, thanks. Reading and studying, and we'll look at Leviticus next week.
Awesome.
That's great.
Feel free to email me if you have any questions or thoughts, and I'll try and find out what Daniel's preferred answers were for Exodus so we can write those down. So,
Don't forget to stop the recording either.
oh, how do I do that?
Just click the button, I imagine, that says stop recording.
Oh,
It's at the bottom.
okay.
Oh, maybe. Oh, I guess Pastor Daniel started it, didn't he?
Oh,
So
cool.
when we all leave, it'll stop.
Okay. Well, have a good evening, everybody. We'll see ya.
Thanks. Bye.
See you next week.